father's obsession with the voice in the darkness must not infect our own ranks.
I guess this means the Empress won't find us fighting our brothers.
This is a 16-part series showing 16 different legendary builds on all 3 classes, all 5 subclasses. I'll be using 16 different exotic armors, 16 different exotic weapons, and 32 different legendary weapons, along with 0 artifact mods. And I will be showing these builds applied over 16 different solo flawless legendary missions. The playlist will be on my channel, dim links will be in the description, and if you enjoy the content, please let me know by leaving a like, a comment, subbing, all that good stuff. So without further ado, I hope you enjoy and let's get into it. Alright, welcome back to the series. I'm on Berserker this time, doing a solo flawless run at the Communion, which is the legendary difficulty campaign mission from the Witch Queen. Kind of a fitting mission because it's Cabal heavy, and Lightfall was Cabal heavy, and Lightfall is where we got Strand. So why would you want to use Berserker? Well, pretty much has the best ad control in the game. It's pretty much the best endgame build that you can have in content such as master level difficulty missions with champions and Grandmasters. It's by far the tankiest build in the game, I would argue, because of Woven Mail and Sever, which are the 2 Strand verb debuffs and buffs that will be benefiting from in this build. It pretty much has the tankiest roaming super in the game, Bladefury, because it benefits from Woven Mail and Sever and roaming super damage resistance. So you can tank bosses with the super in endgame content better than you can any other roaming super. Which also makes this build not that great for low-end content because a lot of it revolves around tanking damage, and in low-end content you're not really taking damage. And it also revolves around controlling the ads, and in low-end content you can just kill the ads easily, and you don't have to worry about controlling them because they're not a threat and you just want to get them out of your way, and that's that. The abilities and the aspects, the way that this this class was made and designed, I think, like from a development standpoint, I think was extremely good. And this Titans, I don't know if you remember, but before Lightfall came out, people were really talking trash about Strand Titan's going to be the worst, and oh, another roaming super and this and that. Personally, I think Strand Titan is by far the best current Strand subclass in the game. It's everything just works together very fluidly. The aspects that we have right now are really good. The gameplay loop that it entices you to play with, it's just super fluid. It's super good. Like the choices that you have to make to build into this class and this build is obvious. There's you don't have to do much head scratching or like give up this for that. It's just like, okay, Woven Mail and Sever, let's capitalize on that, and we're good. And part of that is using the exotic leg piece Abeyant Leaps. I think it's a kind of a must for the way I'm building into Berserker. So I mean, Abeyant Leaps, what it does is when you put down your barricade, you send out 3 suspending waves instead of 1. But what also happens is with Abeyant Leaps, and only with Abeyant Leaps, anytime you suspend any target, you are automatically given Woven Mail, even if the target is not suspendable. So, like, if you noticed, I tried to suspend the tank. It's not because I thought the tank was going to go up in the air and stop shooting me. It's because it was giving me Woven Mail. As long as I'm applying the suspend debuff to the target, whether they go up in the air or not, I'm getting Woven Mail from Abeyant Leaps. And then, so even if you're not using Abeyant Leaps, which I don't recommend, you can still get Woven Mail very easily by destroying Tangles, because the aspect into the Fray just automatically gives us Woven Mail when we destroy Tangles. And, well, actually, the Tangles emit a suspending blast. So, as long as you go to the blast area where the wave is emitting from the Tangle, after you destroy it, you can just stay in that blast range and continue to refresh your Woven Mail until it runs out. Usually, I think it's around 3 seconds, or it'll be like 3 or 4 waves. See, right there? The Tangle kind of emits a spherical radius. As long as you're inside that radius, you'll get Woven Mail applied. And it's only once you leave the radius, or once the wave is done, then your Woven Mail timer will start counting down from 10. So it's a good strategy to, you can carry Tangles around with you and destroy them on the ground next to you, so that you're just automatically given Woven Mail. Don't think of your Tangles so much as, oh, this is a weapon for me to use against the enemies. No, the Tangle is like a mini Sentinel bubble, in the sense that you get crazy damage resistance, which, by the way, is about 60% damage resistance while you have Woven Mail. So use those Tangles as your Woven Mail, as a way to get Woven Mail, more than anything. So that means that you could use certain Strand weapons if you want to create Tangles, but you don't really need to, because as long as you're doing Strand stuff to enemies, like debuffing them with Sever, or killing them with an ability or your super, they're going to be spawning Tangles no matter what. Tangles are on a cooldown in a similar way to a lot of like pickup item type things are on cooldown, like Diamond Lances for Behemoth. Like, you can't infinitely spawn Diamond Lances. They're on a cooldown. Tangles are also on a cooldown. And it actually tells you what the cooldown is on the left side of your screen. But the cooldown is about 10 seconds, so if you play your Tangles correctly, you can basically have Woven Mail from a Tangle, and then spawn another Tangle before your Woven Mail ends, and reproc Woven Mail. But, I mean, Tangles, because like I said, we're using Abeyant Leaps, so we don't have to worry so much about getting Woven Mail from the Tangles. So yeah. So, and then another way to make sure that we're getting Woven Mail constantly, like we want to keep the uptime without having to use Thread of Warding to pick up orbs for Woven Mail, we can just solely rely on Tangles and Suspend. And frankly, you could even do it without the Tangles, because the Abeyant Leaps themselves actually offer you the potential to have 100% uptime on Woven Mail just from being able to infinitely suspend stuff, because when you use your Barricade, you're going to suspend, and when you use your Grenade, you're going to suspend. And as long as you have 100 Resilience and 100 Discipline, you can keep those abilities on their maximum uptime, but you also need Thread of Mind and Thread of Generation. So Thread of Mind, whenever you whenever you kill suspended targets, you get class ability energy, which means you get more barricades just by killing suspended targets. And then Threat of Generation, all you got to do is damage anything, any enemies, with I think any weapons, any abilities, and you just automatically get grenade energy. So you can see where this loop is becoming more and more viable. So then, as far as Sever, and Sever is one of these, it's one of the verbs within Strand that is probably talked about the least, I would say, from what I've seen. And it's because it's not a super tangible debuff in the sense where, like, oh, you see, I've got woven mail, my gun is glowing green, and I got this green blast around me, and it says I got woven mail on the left side of my screen. I know I'm like a walking tank right now. That's like a directly tangible passive buff. Sever is a little bit harder to discern, but it is. So what is Sever? It is basically overload rounds or psycho hack. Psycho hack is the origin trait from the Witch Queen weapons, and which works the same way as overload rounds to a lesser degree. But the way that overload rounds work is anytime you overload enemies, doesn't have to be an overload champion, just any enemies that you apply overload to, they will be debuffed and they will do less damage to you. So with Sever, it's the same thing, but it's an even greater debuff, I believe, from what I've seen and heard, and I guess experience is it's about 30%. So if you sever an enemy, they're doing 30% less damage to you. And then if you have woven mail at the same time, I mean, you could pretty much do the math in your head how little damage you're going to be taking. So there's a few ways that we can apply Sever to targets. One is from Frenzied Blade, which is the charged melee attack that we have. It's the only charged melee attack that we have with Berserker. So if a tanky target like a gladiator, for example, which there's a lot of in this mission, if they get up close, I could instantly use my melee on them so that, you know, maybe they're not gonna two-swipe me with their cleavers. And also, I think it's good to mention here that into the Fray, the aspect that gives us woven mail from Tangles, it also gives us melee energy while we have woven mail, right? So, and we have woven mail all the time, so we're going to be getting our melee back pretty fast, which means that, and we have 3 charges on it, so you really don't need to build into strength at all unless you're doing like a Syntheseps build or something like that. But this isn't what I'm doing. This is an Abeyant Leaps build. And then the super Bladefury, the light attack is basically Frenzied Blade, but better. So your light attack with your super severs targets, right? So that's why I was saying that it's really, the roaming super itself is extremely good on bosses. Like here, I'm going to use it on this mini boss. I'm standing in its fire, severing it, and I don't even know if I had woven mail there. So, I mean, that just goes to show you that just severing a boss while you're dealing melee damage to them actually increases your survivability big time. But yeah, so the super works good, your melee works good, but sometimes, especially for endgame content, you don't want to take that risk to melee a target and put yourself out there just to, you know, you're taking a risk by getting within melee range just to take reduced damage. It's almost counterintuitive in a sense. So I mean, it is still very good, like I was saying, but you have to use it kind of intelligently. Otherwise, you could end up in a bad situation if you know, if your woven mail runs out, or if the target's no longer severed, or if you're just out in a bad position and you don't have your super up anymore. So how else can we get sever but from range is through the fragment thread of isolation, which when you land rapid precision hits on targets with your weapons, they will become severed. And you can see when an enemy like a boss or a tank is severed, because they'll have kind of like a green vertically scrolling wave while they're severed. So you can tell, but it is a little bit hard to see sometimes. But yeah, Thread of Isolation, I highly recommend it with this build, because if you want to do damage at range to a target, you can still, like especially with bosses, if you don't want to get up close and personal, you can just sit there and use a machine gun, land rapid precision hits, whatever weapon you want that is going to, you know, that can land rapid precision hits. So like a bow might not be the best thing because it has a slow rate of fire and it might be harder to proc, but like with Retrofit Escapade here, super easy to sever targets. So it's really good. And then Thread of Continuity also plays into Sever and Suspend, obviously. That's probably one of the most popular fragments, you know, for all the subclasses. Pretty much all the Strand builds, everybody's using Thread of Continuity, because it increases the uptime of Suspend, Unravel, Sever. And I'm not using Sever here, but that doesn't matter. So like suspended targets, I think they're suspended for 50% longer than normal, so that's really good. But they're also severed for longer. So that's so yeah, I'm using Thread of Continuity here for two benefits, for woven mail, or for suspend and sever. But suspend is you know, basically giving me woven mail. And then so like I was saying, with Berserker more than the other Strand subclasses, you're really free to use whatever weapons you want, because you're not building into Unravel and Hatchlings and all that, which means that you know, this is a very universal build. You can use it with different surges going on and different content. So like I used this build when it was Proving Grounds week, and I just did a whole bunch of Proving Grounds. I made up a Solar Titan build, and I made up the Strand Titan build for it. And this was basically the build that I used to run Proving Grounds multiple times and farm it for weapons and shards and stuff. Just super good. Not only that, but like if there's any endgame content that has unstoppables, champions in general, but especially unstoppables, because you have unlimited barricades and grenades, like you can just constantly stun unstoppables and just disable them by putting them up in the air. Not only that, but like you can put up barriers. You can just forego running barrier weapon if you time your suspends correctly and put a barrier champion up in the air. You can just kill them outright just from suspending them. And you can disable overload champions as well. It's a little bit harder to kill overload champions without an overload weapon, because they're not going to be taking much damage until they're stunned, unlike barriers. But still, you can disable them and make them, you know, a non-threat. So with that said, use whatever weapons make sense for the mission. Don't worry about how it synergizes with Berserker, because that doesn't matter. This Berserker's a self-sustaining, synergistic build just from its own abilities with Abeyant Leaps, Sever, Woven Mail. But with that said, I think with all the Strand builds, especially ones that do a lot of suspend or rely on suspend, damage over time, area of effect weapons are super good, and that's why I'm using Osteo Striga here. Monarque would also be very good, but while targets are up in the air, I can shoot one of those targets with Osteo. It spreads the poison all around. So that means, like, basically I could suspend a bunch of enemies, I could apply the poison, and then I could just let the poison do its work, and I can focus my attention to other threats. And chances are all those suspended targets will be dead by the time I check back with them. And then, so I already went over Retrofit here. Obviously I'm using Retrofit because it makes sense for the mission to a degree, but more so because I wanted to use it as a way to easily proc Sever on, like, the bosses and the tanks and such. And then as far as combat mods go, well, Thread of Mind and Thread of Generation are basically freeing up your combat mods. So this is another benefit to this build, is that the two fragments themselves are so good, Mind and Generation, for the class ability uptime and your grenade uptime, that you don't really need to go crazy with combat mods like Impact Induction and Bolstering Detonation and all that. Because fragments are doing the work, and they're doing better than those combat mods could ever do. So I would basically suggest that you just purely build into orb generation, and then focus on your weapons. Right, so you can put on weapon reload speed mods and weapon surges on your legs. So in this run, I'm actually using triple kinetic weapon surge to make Osteo Striga that much better while I have armor charge, and I'm using a kinetic reloader, and that's basically it. Other than that, like I said, orb generation and uptime on your armor charge is the only thing you really need to consider, obviously, to benefit from those surges. So the way I like to, actually, I pretty much do this now on all my builds. It doesn't matter what I'm doing. I just always go with triple weapon surge mods, depending on whatever it is I'm using. So if I'm in a raid, obviously, and I'm using Thunderlord, then I would go triple arc surge, no question. Obviously, you want that 22% extra damage that having 3 weapon surge mods on your legs gives you. 1 copy is 10%, 2 copies is 17, 3 copies is 22. So 22 is basically radiant. So you can't really go wrong with that. And I was using a lot of stat fonts. So, like, if I had tier 7 discipline, I could use a font of whatever it is, the one that gives you higher discipline rate. It basically gives you 30 stat points for free while you're charged with armor charge. The whole beginning of the season, I was thinking, oh, this is amazing. I'm gonna, like, just have, I could basically have like 3-4 stats at tier 7, and then I could supplement them with fonts, and then technically I have like quadruple 100s easily. Well, it doesn't really matter that much for stats, and sometimes it could be a little bit tricky to keep the uptime on your armor charge, so you don't have it all the time. But when you do have armor charge this way, I know that I'm going to have maximum weapon damage, which means, and I'm also running that with double time dilation, elemental time dilation on the class item. So that means that I have, I think, 18 seconds per orb per armor charge. So if I have 3 stacks of armor charge, that's almost a solid minute of 22% more damage. So I've basically, that's, now that we're almost at the end of the season, this is basically what I'm doing with my armor charge. I'm not I'm not doing it any other way. Don't bother with charged up or stacks on stacks. It's just so much better this way. But anyways, that's the end of the video. So I'll see what I have coming up next, and I will see you then. Leave a like. Talk to you later. Take care.